Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to A Very Australian Story. My name's Barbara Simon, and I'm the Vice President of the Australian Jewish Genealogical Society, also known as the Historical Society. We used to be the Genealogical Society. Kathy is going to talk to us this afternoon, and she's from Sydney and is a writer and a podcaster. She's currently writing her second novel, called Safety in the Home, and preparing her social history of Sydney, Seeking Sydney, to a podcast series. Kathy was born in Australia, right? And her grandparents left Poland in 1919. In April of 2025, Kathy travelled to Poland to investigate their journey and to walk in the footsteps of her family while hoping to solve some mysteries. Welcome, Kathy. We're looking forward to hearing your very Australian story. And could I ask everybody online, please, hold your questions to the end and we'll look forward to answering them then. Kathy, enjoy.
Thank you, Barbara. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for coming. Thanks, I'll say now, thanks to Barbara and Danny for this opportunity and all your support. It's been fabulous. I'd also like to acknowledge that we're on the lands of the Bidjigal and Gadigal people today. I've called this A Very Australian Story because I want to write about both of my parents. And my mother comes from convict stock from the 1820s. And my father comes from Polish Jewish stock. And I think that's a very Australian story that those two lines get united in me and my sisters. So that's the purpose of that name. This talk about the Prokhovnik family in Poland is about where my grandparents came from, why I had no connection to Poland, what happened when I started to get interested in Poland, and then my visit to Poland. Here's a photo of some relatives of mine, and they come from my grandmother's side of the family. A distant cousin gave me this. This woman seated right in the middle at the front could be my grandmother, or it could be my great-aunt, Tante Manya. I don't know. The only thing written on the photo was the name, and you'll have to excuse my Polish pronunciation. It said Alexandrowa Kujawski, Poland, which I always thought was the name of a person. But once I'd been to Poland, I realised that it could be the name of a place, and sure enough, it is. It's the name of a place, Alexandrov Kujawski, that's between Wloclawek, my grandparents' town, and Toruń. So it's just a little bit north of Wloclawek. And that's all I know about this photo, and that's one of the reasons I'm interested to find more. I do know these people. This is my grandfather, Max, my grandmother, Eva, my father, Simon, who's the older boy, and my uncle, Natal, who's the younger boy standing there. My grandparents, Max and Eva, left Wloclawek in 1919, and the family story is that they were making rosettes before May Day because they were socialists. And they heard that the police were going to arrest them, so they left town, packed bags, left town early in the morning, walked to Paris, where my grandfather's brother Jean and his wife Marie were living. And so that's the story, that they walked from Wloclawek in Poland to Paris, stopping along the way to make a little bit of money because my grandfather was a tailor. And then if they had the money, they'd catch the train. The story is that they realised that my grandmother was pregnant in Magdeburg in Germany, and they got married there. Then they kept walking to Paris. My father was born just after they reached Paris in 1920, and they lived there for 5 years. My uncle Natal was born in 1923, and a couple of years after that, they must have realised that things were getting hot in Europe for them as Jews, so they went to New Zealand, where they stayed for about 5 years. They found New Zealand boring, as my father often used to say, so they went back to Europe, to London and Paris. But by the 1930s, they decided that wasn't safe again. So they headed back to New Zealand and they got off the ship in Melbourne, where they had friends from Wloclawek who said, stay here, Melbourne's great, there's a big Jewish community. So they did that. By 1933, they were established in Melbourne. This photo was taken at Port Arlington. I don't know Melbourne very well, but it was a Workers' International Relief summer camp. And I guess it was a kids camp because you can see all the kids there. And one of those kids, I don't know if you can see the boy with the sort of white mob cap on his head. That's my father. Their travels came to an end the following year. Who knows, they might have kept travelling, but my grandfather Max died the following year in 1934. So my grandmother stayed in Melbourne and very courageously brought up 2 boys and managed to make a living for herself there. My father never visited Poland, and neither had I. My father had said he had no interest in the place, there was no connections, all the relatives were dead, and I'd never wanted to go either. I'd absorbed that feeling, but encouraged by my partner Peter, I decided to go there this year. And so last year I started doing some research, contacted a lot of people. I sent out emails blindly, and luckily I got some fantastic responses, including from Barbara here, who's been an immense help. She recommended a researcher called Anna Bianajewska, who traced my family back to my 3 greats-grandfather, born about 1777, and his wife, born about 1784, which is going back a long way. She also sent lots of photos and excerpts from documents, including this one that shows that my grandfather, Max Prokhovnik, was already in Magdeburg in April 1919. He was not making rosettes in Wloclawek. The family myth was shattered. I mean, my grandmother could have been making rosettes in Wloclawek, but obviously my grandfather was not. I started to dig deeper and try to get addresses for my family in Wloclawek. Again, Barbara suggested some names. And one of those contacts, Katarina Sudaj, put me in touch with Katarina Kasia Dabrowska, who lives in Wloclawek. Both of these Katarinas belong to an organisation called Forum for Dialogue, which is a Polish organisation with members throughout Poland, on the whole not Jewish, I mean maybe exclusively not Jewish, who set up projects and activities in their towns to revive the local Polish Jewish past. They set up commemorative plaques, they create oral histories of local Jewish history, they organise walks that tour Jewish sites in their towns, and so on. They're very active. Kasia Dabrowska invited me to meet with her when we were in Wloclawek, and we set up a date. She told me she's the vice principal of the Tadeusz Kosciuszko Motor School Complex, and she doesn't speak English, but she would organise an interpreter. The documents that I got from Anna, the researcher, showed house numbers, but not addresses. I don't know if you can see in this, up in the top left-hand corner, there's the number 113, right up the top there. So that's all the address we had, that these people were living in house number 113, but that didn't seem to make any sense, and there was no way of sort of finding the corresponding address. So again, Barbara helped putting me in touch with people who might have the answers. The first answer was from Estelle Rosinski from the Australian Society of Polish Jews. She said, "My understanding is that the change of numbers and why and how that was done varies from town to town. In Zadunska Wola, where my great-grandparents were from, the numbers on the main street were reversed so that the first numbers became the last and vice versa. In some streets, the odd and even numbers were swapped. Odd became even and even became odd. I haven't got to the bottom of why that happened, but anyway. The next person to reply was Matan Shefi, a researcher at the Polin Museum in Warsaw. That's the Museum of the History of Polish Jews, and we'll get to that. He said that some towns have books of addresses that show the old system, where there were just numbers, next to the new system of numbers and street names, but not Wloclawek. It hasn't got these books. Proper way of finding out, he said, is searching the historical house ownership records, which is a bureaucratic process, and you've got to go through the regional court, which was way beyond my capacity because I don't speak Polish. But we were close to leaving Australia for Poland, so I arranged to meet Matan at Polin in Warsaw. On our second day in Warsaw, we went to Polin. Matan generously spent the whole morning with us. He talked about various ways of finding addresses, and he talked more generally about the Polish Jewish cultures and how they'd been intertwined before the war. He said between the wars, 37% of Poland's population consisted of minorities, but by the 1960s, 97% of Poles were Catholics. In Wloclawek, 30% of the population was Jewish in 1900, and in the 1930s to 1940s, it was 20%. He said this was a common ratio. He described it as a Polish-Jewish world before World War II, where food and culture and ways of thinking were mixed. When we left him, we walked through the museum. This map shows Wloclawek. I took photos of anything that mentioned Wloclawek. This shows Wloclawek as an example of a town that wouldn't admit Jews until 1802. After that, the Jewish population grew rapidly to nearly 20% within 50 years. So thinking back to the dates I had from my grandparents, they couldn't have been born in Wloclawek because they were born in the late 1700s, but they could have moved there. And I know they were living in villages close by. The researcher, Anna, hadn't been able to find any evidence of my grandparents being married in Magdeburg, despite the family story that they had been. She had suggested that they'd been married in a religious ceremony. But this plaque in Poland, that they'd been married in a religious ceremony but that would only have been recorded by the rabbi and hadn't been recorded anywhere else, which is why she couldn't find documents. But this plaque in Poland makes it clear that rabbis had to report marriages to the authorities. So that exploded another family myth. It actually said in that plaque, not fulfilling this duty of reporting the marriage to the authorities carried the threat of substantial fines. One of the mysteries in my family has always been who was my grandmother's mother. We know that my grandfather's father married twice. He married one woman who was my grandmother Eva's mother, and then he married a second woman who was the mother of that woman at the beginning who I thought might be my Tante Manya. No one knew anything about my grandmother's mother. Even her name has been obliterated from family memory. No one, even my grandmother didn't seem to know. My grandmother's mother had left her husband after my grandmother was born, and at a guess, she'd gone to Warsaw. This plaque in Poland, in a whole section on Jewish women around the early 20th century, indicates that this wasn't unusual. According to other captions that we saw on other photos, Jewish women were so restricted in the home that they would take any sort of work to gain financial independence, and they would leave home because they were so oppressed at home. So, I imagine that's what happened to my grandmother's mother, but still, I'd like to know more about her. Still in Poland Museum, shockingly, I knew very little about the extent of the genocide on Poland's Jews. This plaque shows how they dominated the numbers killed. Of all of the Jewish people killed, 3 million from Poland, right at the top there. Prior to the outbreak of World War II, there were 3.5 million Jews in Poland. So if 3 million were killed, that doesn't leave a lot. I also learned in Poland about the Wannsee conference where the genocide was planned, which, that question had actually arisen as I was walking through Poland. I had wondered if the genocide just happened or if it had been mapped out. And then there was a section on the Wannsee conference, which was truly shocking. After that, after being in the Poland Museum, I noticed so much evidence of Jewish life in pre-World War II Warsaw. We visited a branch of the Warsaw Museum in the suburb of Praga, and there was a picture of a synagogue built in 1836 in the shape of a rotunda. This was almost unique in Europe. There were pictures of Jewish traders, and in the yard of the museum, the remains of a prayer house dating from at least 1869. On our last morning in Warsaw, I just walked down to the end of the street and spookily there was a building with my name on it. This turned out to be the name for the building. It was a theatre. Stara means old, and Prokhovnik is referring to the fact that it's housed in an old gunpowder storage tower. I had known that my name Prokhovnik means keeper of the gunpowder, but I had never seen my name on a building before. In Australia, I know every Prokhovnik. There wouldn't be 20 of us, so it's quite something to see your name on a building. From Warsaw, we caught the train to Wloclawek. It's a journey of about 1.5 hours. And I have to say every moment felt important, just looking out the window. We found the apartment that we'd booked, and then we went out to explore the town. We had a few addresses, after all that work, a few addresses of my ancestors, and we had one that was 23 3 Maya Street that we couldn't understand why there was a 23 and a 3. But then we got to the main square and we found 3 Maya Street, which is the name of the street. It commemorates the date May the 3rd, Constitution Day, because on May the 3rd, 1791, Poland adopted the first democratic constitution in Europe. So this is a picture of 3 Maya Street when we saw it this year. We then found house number 23, which was where my grandfather's aunt, Sura, née Offenbach, lived, and she had a shop downstairs and an apartment upstairs. So that shop that you can see there would have been her shop in the pre-World War II. And here's Sura Offenbach. These pictures are from Anna, the researcher. Here's Sura Offenbach and her husband, Abram Icek Berglo, who she married in 1895. His sister, also Sura, married Naftal Meir Prokhovnik, so she was my grandfather's mother, or my great-grandmother. I suddenly felt very close to my distant relatives. Anna's research had included a lot of details about Sura and her family. 2 of her sons, Benek and Julek, went to Paris to study, and Julek stayed there. Benek returned to Wloclawek and was killed by the Gestapo at Wloclawek railway station in 1942. His wife and children were also murdered. Julek and his wife survived the war in Paris. Sura and 2 of her daughters, Estera and Tauba, were moved to the Warsaw ghetto and then killed. That's all information that Anna had been able to dig up for me. The next day, we caught a taxi out to the Kosciuszko Motor School complex to meet Kasia Dabrowska from the Forum for Dialogue. I was totally unprepared for the reception there. We were ushered into the school hall. There was a long table. There was a white tablecloth. There were cakes and flowers and pots of coffee and tea. There was a camera set up to film us and a photographer following us around the room. And it was such a warm, such a, important feeling in the room. It was incredible. Kasia greeted us warmly. That's Kasia at the back there with her arms crossed. We were introduced to the school's principal. He's there as well on the left, on Kasia's right. And then many of the teachers we met as well, including Pavel, who's there sitting down with the glasses on. He's the English teacher, and he did a massive job of translating for us all day. Then we met the students. You can see the students sitting there at the table. They had done a big project during the year that Kasia had initiated for them to do, about a Jewish girl called Klosha Altman, who had lived in Wloclawek and joined the resistance during the war. And then she was shot when she went to the Warsaw ghetto. And the students had done all sorts of different things to commemorate Tosha. One of the students, Sophia, whose family had actually fled Ukraine and had only been there for a couple of years, Sophia had written a graphic novel about Tosha and the script for a film, and they showed us the film acted out by the students who we met. And this is a still from the film, which was, very, very well done, very moving. After our coffee and cake, we had a tour of the school, which was very well appointed. Fabulous resources for the kids, including a board on the left there, entries in the competition, shows some of the entrants in a competition that they ran throughout the region for kids to draw a picture of Tosha Altman or do more research on her. And then there was also a painting of the person the school was named after, and we thought we'd be able to tell them something, but of course they knew about the Australian connection. Then we drove into Wloclawek. Pavel translated, and the students read prepared descriptions in English of each place we visited. We went to all of the sites of Jewish significance in the town, but the first place we visited was 4 Zdunska Street, and this was one of the other few addresses we'd been able to dig up, and this was the house where my grandmother, Eva Skakowska, lived with her father, Isaac, and his second wife, Macia Gonska. We were lucky that Kasia knew someone who used to live in that house, and that's the woman in the middle with, very animated. She was fantastic. So she was able to take us through to the courtyard, and that's us in the courtyard. Once outside my grandmother's house, Kasia pointed out number 8 Zdunska Street, a building that used to house a Jewish theatrical society, which was exciting for me, unexpected, because my grandmother was very interested in acting, and so it was highly likely that she used to go there, just next to where she lived. So I guess that's one of the benefits of going to the place and finding these completely unexpected connections that you just can't guess at. Around the corner from Zdunska Street was Kolwiecka 35, the site of the Maccabi Sports Centre. And all of these places, they're just, empty. You can see there, it's just an empty lot. There's nothing there. It's been locked down, but that was the site. And this student, Victor, is reading his description of the site to us. You can just see how much effort they went to. Further down the street, at number 17, that was the site of the new synagogue. So there was an old synagogue, and then there was this new synagogue. And so you can see on the left, there's an old picture where you can actually see the synagogue there on the left behind the tree. That would have been the synagogue. But when we were there this year, that's my picture of the site. It's just a block of units. We walked around to Stodolna 70, which was a building that housed the Jewish hospital. It's now a medical centre. And again, you can see an historic photo there of what it would have been like inside the hospital. And then on the right, that's us there this year. So then we arrived at 3 Maya Street again, and we could see it had once been magnificent. And you can see that in the historic photo on the left. It had been the centre of town, and you can still see, it's the centre of town. It's wide. All the houses, buildings that line it are large, and they would have been stately and elaborate once. They are no longer. But these days, particularly approaching it as we did on this second day, approaching it from the riverside, Kasia said it's dangerous down there because so much of it is derelict. A large proportion of the shops in 3 Maya Street used to belong to Jewish people who, like my grandfather's aunt Sura, had shops below and apartments above. We stopped and looked at number 23 again, and there it is across the road from us. And we talked about my family connection to that house. And here we are at the end of our tour of Wloclawek. That's our whole party. So Kasia and I are at the front, and Pavel's behind us, and the students. And, we'd been out all day. It was a staggering experience. The students were sent home because it was 3:00 by then. So off they went. And here's a map that I've just scribbled up just to show how contained the Jewish community was in Wloclawek. So you can see all those red scribbles. They show points at the new synagogue, the old synagogue, the Jewish hospital. They're all in a very small area. And in fact, I have found statistics showing, where Jewish people lived in these streets. And you can see that 3 Maya Street, over a quarter of the Jewish people lived in 3 Maya Street. So they must have really dominated that street. The last thing we did with Kasia and Pavel and Anna, who was taking photographs all day, was to visit the memorial for the Jews on the outskirts of town. This is where the Wloclawek ghetto had been placed and where all the Jews had been taken before being taken to Warsaw or straight to camps. Now it holds this memorial, and there's a commemoration there every year on April the 19th, which is the anniversary of the beginning of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. We just missed that by a few days, but Kasia told us a lot about what had happened to the Jewish people of Wloclawek at that point. Once we left Wloclawek, we went to Gdansk, which is in the north of Poland on the Baltic Sea. Again, World War II dominated our experience. The town had been rebuilt after the war, and that's an astounding thing to contemplate when you look at it, and it looks so old and established. And then out near the docks, Gdansk's famous ports, there is the Museum of the Second World War. So we decided to be brave and go there. I tried to avoid the section on the Holocaust, but I did peer in at the end of it because there were 2 entrances, and so I did look in from the end, and I saw this cascade of photos, and the people in them looked so similar to my relatives that I showed you in that first photo that, I was very moved. And I felt the absence of my relatives, and that I'd been to all these places and none of the people that I'd seen in the streets looked like this. But here they were in the Museum of the Second World War. So that's where I finally found my people, I guess. Since coming back to Australia, I've done some more bits of research and found, among other things, this memorial to the Jews of Wloclawek, which is in a Parisian cemetery. On this memorial are the names of my grandfather's brother, Jean, or Julek, as he was called, and his wife, Marie. And they're the people that my grandparents were going to Paris to meet up with, and who greeted them so warmly and looked after them and helped them get jobs and get established. And So they were very important people to my grandparents, and here are their names on this memorial. And the researcher Anna had also found their names on a register of deaths that shows they died in Drancy in 1944. I've also delved a little more into what was happening in Wloclawek that might have made my grandparents want to leave. Since finding that my grandfather had already left Wloclawek at the time of making rosettes for May Day, I wondered what else was going on, and I've discovered there was a war going on between Russia and Poland between 1919 and 1920, and that reached, not till 1920, but it did reach the Vistula right at Wloclawek. In early January 1919 in Wloclawek, there were large-scale anti-Jewish riots after a rally organised by the Polish Communist Workers' Party. Although the City Council's anti-Jewish riot commission concluded that the organisers were both Jews and Poles, it was the Jews who were beaten and whose shops were looted. It makes sense then that my grandfather would leave town, and that later that same year, in late April, there could well have been threats to people planning to participate in the May Day March. So that would have encouraged my grandmother to leave and join Max in Magdeburg. Some people in my family survived, obviously. Here is my father in Paris. My father is in that sort of checky jumper there, sitting down, with his cousin on his right is his cousin Marcel, and on his left is his cousin Odette, two of his Aunt Rivka's children. And standing up with the moustache is cousin Nathan, who was the warmest person whenever any of us went to Paris. He would greet us like, yeah, he loved us all. He was the only surviving child of my father's uncle Zelig and Aunt Berta. And then there's Odette's son Jean-Jacques and his wife Rosalind there, just nearly in the picture. As you can see, I've still got many questions, and I'm continuing to do research. And I suppose I hope in doing things like doing this talk, it's more likely I will discover some answers. So thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for listening. It's okay. If there are any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. Peter, yes, you've got a question.
Okay. Look, thanks very much. And just a quick question, because my curiosity's got the better of me. I did live in New Zealand for a couple of years, and you've just referred to the country, not to any particular place, and referred to it as boring, which is unfortunate. It's beautiful.
I know.
Beautiful country. So whereabouts in New Zealand were they in that first time? And I think you said that they were going back and then got waylaid at Melbourne. And
That's right.
Out at Melbourne. So were they going then back to the same place, or were they going to be somewhere else?
I think so. They were in Wellington.
It was in Wellington. Okay,
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, they're in Wellington, and I think they were going back to the same place because they would have, at least made some contacts there. Yeah, yeah.
The Polish connection to New Zealand most famously was with a group of refugees, Catholic refugees that came out during World War II, and were initially, I think, in quarantine on the island in the middle of Wellington Harbour.
Oh, right.
But there's quite a sort of a connection. It was a group of kids that came out and sort of Poles in New Zealand today. I've got a person I met some decades ago. I haven't spoken to him in a couple of years, but he's still there. Whose parents were part of that group. So yeah, there is quite a strong Polish, non-Jewish connection in New Zealand. I also believe, there was a group in a place called possibly Pahatua, which is in the Wairarapa area to the northeast of Wellington.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know.
I just thought,
Yeah. I was only saying, you know, of course New Zealand isn't boring. But, you know, that's how my father always used to describe how it was in the, you know, whenever it was late 1920s when they were there. Yeah. Cheryl, hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thanks.
That's good. I loved hearing your story. So
Thank you.
I know we had a very brief chat back in June, so I was very much looking forward to hearing your story today. I'm curious to know, with your overseas contacts, did they actually do the research, or did they uncover people to do the research? So if it was paper research, how did you deal with the document translation? Or was it oral stories that somehow you were able to tap into? I'm interested in terms of that sort of context.
So Anna Bienkowska, she did the research, and she sent me like a huge document, a huge Word document, so that she compiled everything that she'd found. And she also sent me some of those documents that I showed. So she showed me like screenshots of documents that she'd been consulting, and photos and so on. So it was in English, but then I had to go through the Word document that she sent me and pull out, because it was more sort of descriptive. It wasn't dot points. It was a bit hard to make my way through it. So then I had to spend some time pulling out what she'd given me and putting it into a more sort of table form, so that I could see how the different families, went down the generations. She had a lot of digressions. So, she'd start talking about someone, and then they married this person, and that family also lived in Wloclawek and they did that, and which was like fabulous for me to give me all that background. But when I wanted to just pull out my family tree, then I had to go through it, and that took quite a while to get that all together. Yeah.
Was that a free service?
No. So I did have to pay Anna, but very reasonable amount for the amount of work she must have done. Was just fantastic. And so I was, very happy to pay. Yeah.
Just on that, was that the financial side of it? Was there some sort of structure or arrangement made around that before she commenced the work, or did it happen at some point down? Like, what does it look like?
There wasn't. And I did say, like, every single email, I said, please give me a quote, and how much is this going to cost? And she just kept on saying, oh, don't worry. And, I'm just going to do it. And, I was a bit anxious. But then when the bill came in, I was like, oh, wow, that's really reasonable. Yeah. It was less than $1,000. Let me put it that way.
$500.
It was $800 Australian. Yeah. Yeah. So, like, for the many hours, she put an enormous amount of work into that. So I was, very grateful. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
What about the others that you met along the way?
The other people I met along the way, like Matan Shefi, that was free. That, we didn't pay him anything, but he's a researcher at Pollen, and I suspect, or I think I know, that that's part of his job to help the public with research. And so he was, he was doing part of his job, but he was very, very generous in his time. And the other people, that I got email responses from, they were just like, like Barbara, doing it out of the goodness of their hearts and just, wanting to help, which was brilliant. Yeah.
Kathy, thank you so much.
Thank you, Barbara.
That was fascinating.
Thank you.
And so in order to thank you, we've given you a little something that we hope you'll enjoy. You and Peter together will enjoy and remember this fabulous trip that you've both had.
Oh, well, thank you
for sharing it.
I should have brought something for you. Thank you for all your help. Yes.
It was a great pleasure.
Oh.
And that's what we enjoy doing, is helping people find their families.
Yeah.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Bob.